Proper screen exposure. We start out with the most basic fluorescent units. These work great, inexpensive. The exposure is longer. Again, they're basic. I recommend them as a startup. They work fine. That's your least expensive. You can actually build your own. I've seen a lot of people build them. I've built many of them out of fluorescents. Then we move up to metal halide. Our unit down there actually has 2 metal halide lamps. They're expensive. It's called a point source. It's like a headlight. You know, it's gonna spread out just like a headlight. They find that that's the best way to shoot a screen. Very fast exposure, best reproduction. You know, you want a system that will give you a consistent, reliable exposure over and over. We have a screen here that I want to pass around too. How do I get the right exposure? How do I know that I'm shooting my screens correctly? We've come to the point now where we have screen calculators, and basically what it is, it's a film that has filters over it. So what we'll do, we'll expose this screen with this filter on it, and this will get you right on the money. And it's very simple. We know on this screen here, it was about a 5-minute. So you do it twice what you're supposed to do. And you can see it, the 50%, it's just perfect right there. And another way to tell, and I'm gonna pass this around, you can look up at it, and where you see the color change, where it changes from lighter, and it stays the same, well, that's right in the middle. So these things are perfect. You can do this with any of your meshes. We sell these, they're not cheap, they're probably $60, $70. But sometimes our outside guys carry these in their cars so they can help you out there. But do y'all use an exposure calculator? It's a great tool. Any questions? Exposure?
Yeah, there was a question about ghosting, about getting rid of ghosting on your screen.
Ghosting?
Yeah.
That is probably, that's probably jumping up a little bit. Usually with ghosting, what that is either old emulsion or ink layers that you aren't getting out. Okay, when you have a ghosting, that's when we're going to go to a haze remover. Now, this haze remover here, the CCI, this is probably one of the newest ones out right now, and it's very mild, but this works great. Another thing about ghosting that will eliminate that is the hot water. If you're using cold water all the time, again, do you wash your dishes with cold water? You know, how good is that going to do? These are slick polyester threads. The hot water just takes it right off. But I do recommend this haze remover. Now, the salesman that sold me all these CCI products years ago, he told me if I would use this neutralized degreaser each time, it almost eliminates the haze remover. I didn't believe him, but it did. This is probably one of the best products they sell. It's about $10 a gallon, and you mix it 3-to-1 with water. But this will eliminate a lot of that also. Ghosting is an issue. A lot of people will go to some really harsh haze removers. I don't recommend them. I've got scars on my hands from this stuff. A lot of people call it acid, and it's just too harsh. The pink stuff, the CCI, it smells like bubble gum, you know? So we've come a long way in those chemicals also. But hot water and a good haze remover, that'll eliminate ghosting. Yes, sir?
What is ghosting?
Well, basically, if you were going to hold one of those screens up, and you could actually see an image in there. You know, it's just like a haze, But
What is your preferred time of exposure?
well, that's a good question. That's where the exposure calculator comes in. You know, what's the best time for exposure? I can actually take a screen and shoot it with the sun. It's just like that. You know, each unit is going to be different. And a good exposure calculator will help you determine the best time. A lot of times, if I set you up with new equipment and we coat some screens, a lot of times I can get in the ballpark pretty close. you know. And if I have problems, I'll pull out the screen calculator and we'll do it exactly. But you'll find, you know, it's coating technique. It's the emulsion you're using. You know, you're probably not gonna get a perfect screen the first one that you do. You know, are you coating screens now and shooting them?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you noticing some issues or?
Just curious, how long?
Yeah. Well, that is another good question. Again, because the dual cure emulsion, the exposure latitude is like this. You can underexpose it or overexpose it, still get a perfectly good screen. Pure photopolymer is like this. Are you using dual cure or pure? Okay. Which one are you using?
It's called like text or something.
Again, I go back to the Kiwo products. I just love them. You know, the reproduction is perfect. You know, I just don't have problems with them. And again, you know, I'll wear y'all out on this, but I think you've got to have at least warm water in your print shop. You know, that makes a lot of difference. Ice cold water is just that. I mean, it just literally slows everything down. I just don't think it works as well. The exposure time in relation to mesh and emulsion, absolutely. When you get to an 83 mesh, you've got a much thicker layer of emulsion on that over a 230 or a 195. So it is relative to your mesh and your emulsion. Typically it's the mesh, you know, unless you're using a capillary film. It's the same exposure all the time. Once you get capillary film down, it's that same uniform, you're just shooting the emulsion there, you know, and it isn't embedded into the screen, you know, like a direct emulsion. But typically your 83 meshes, I'm gonna say 8 minutes. Okay, you go down to probably a 195, maybe even half that time. So it is all relative to the mesh. That's a good question. Okay, so screen washout. There's that word again, warm water. We want to use warm water. You want to start with the print side of the screen. Move to the squeegee side. It's very important to go back and forth. I've noticed you don't want to just wash it out on one side. Soak it both sides, let it sit for a minute or so, and then continue rinsing. If the screen washes out entirely, you've either underexposed it. If it won't wash out at all, you've overexposed it. The screen may have an issue with the older emulsion. That's a sad part. You know, you don't know one way or another sometimes when you're first starting. Again, that emulsion is so important to protect it. If it's gotten too hot or too cold, a lot of times that'll do it. That's another reason I like the dual cure emulsions, because they are so forgiving when it comes to underexposure or overexposure. Proper screen exposure can be assured with an exposure calculator. After washout of the image and design is clear, you can blot the image area with newspaper on both sides. This will take all the moisture out and the emulsion residue left in the screen. Has anybody in here shot a screen? You put it on press, and you have this haze in there, this something you can't figure it out. Or you hold it up and you see this junk in there. Well, I found over the years, if you'll blot it with a newspaper on both sides, that pulls all that out. What it is, the emulsion, it kind of leaches down in there and will sink down in there, and you won't even see it. But you get on press and you start printing and you can't figure out what that piece is in there. Well, I can guarantee you that emulsion probably has just leaked in there. Paper will eliminate that. You'd be surprised how many times I've gone into shops and they can't figure it out. It's like driving them crazy. We wash the screen out, hit it with paper on both sides. You don't have that problem anymore, just with that one step. Dry screen completely, check for pinholes. These can be filled with blockout. Next, tape up the screen and you're ready to do the press. We sell blockouts. And it's funny, they come in all different colors. This eliminates all your pinholes. We saw these cute little 3M squeegees. These two go real well together. We'll cover that in a little bit as far as application. Any questions on screen washout? Yes, sir? Good question. Good question. Should you use a pressure washer when you're washing out your image? I go into shops all the time where they do that. I don't recommend it. Your emulsion is very fragile at that point. You know, a good sprayer is really all that I've ever used at that point. If you're having to use a pressure washer to wash out just after you've exposed, I think you've probably overexposed it. You've got too much emulsion on that screen. There's some other issue. But I never had to do that. So if you are using a pressure washer to wash out a screen, just your image, I don't know. I haven't had any issues where I had to do that. A lot of people do it, and if it works, go ahead, you know. Maybe they're doing it because it washes it out faster, but to me, it's just too fragile at that point, you know. So I just don't recommend it if you don't have to do it, you know. Okay, now we're getting into some of the issues with coating the screens properly. Again, I've told you about, I know people that they'll just put one coat of emulsion on. That's all I need. I don't need any more. Well, mesh bridging. This is just a neat word for getting a nice line across your mesh. Now, if you don't put enough emulsion on there, you have a bad film. Again, real thin emulsion layers. That's what you're going to get. You know, you don't have enough emulsion on that screen to produce a nice, clean stencil. Mesh bridging is the ability of the emulsion to cross a mesh opening in a straight line. Poor mesh bridging results in distortion of the image and sawtooth effects. I've done prints before that they sawtoothed real bad. We'll come to find out, you know, whoever did the screen, they didn't put enough emulsion on there or didn't do it properly. And that again goes back to that 2 and 2 step I found that has worked perfect for me. And it's that simple or that difficult. Yes, sir.
Do you get that sometimes where you like maybe using the wrong screen for a print like a 110 and you really should be using a 156 or 195?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can mesh bridging failure be caused from the wrong mesh? Absolutely, absolutely. If your art is fine lines or a halftone are just not made for a coarser screen, you're going to get that same effect. You know, because you need to. That's very important to balance your screen mesh with your art. You know, and the proper amount of emulsion on each one of them. It's amazing how many things work together in unison to give a good screen. And again, that's why I always was real intrigued with it, because you do one of these things wrong and it's no good, you know. So proper mesh bridging is very important. And you'll notice that the young ladies put loops on all your desks. Those loops are very helpful, you know, when you come to that. That's very important. Okay, edge definition. This is just another variable with mesh bridging. A smooth edge aids in the ink release and results in a better detail reproduction. You know, this is done with an electron microscope. You know, we probably wouldn't be able to see anything like this, but again, a rough stencil wall and a smooth. Again, you can see this emulsion layer there's hardly any there. This is a nice, thick emulsion layer. That is going to give an excellent print. And again, that goes back to, you know, poor technique. And a lot of times, you know, once you get it down, you'll never have this problem, but it aids us in learning how to do this properly. Any questions on the edge? Now this is a fancy term here, emulsion over mesh ratio. I thought they were taking it a little bit far when they were doing this, but it really makes sense. Emulsion buildup is needed to allow the ink to flow underneath the threads in a mesh opening. Recommended emulsion buildup should be a minimum of 4 to 5 microns. You know, that's just relative to what their formula is. But this is interesting. You can see this is just how thin that emulsion layer is. Well, you know, it's going to distort the image. Nice thick emulsion layer. We're going to reproduce exactly what we have there. That's so important. Again, that proper emulsion application. And you don't have to measure your emulsion or anything. You're going to see if it's correct or not. Okay, we've washed out our screens. Now we're ready to block out and tape the screens. Again, with the block out, carefully block out the screens to prevent leaks around the edge of the screen and ensure that all pinholes are covered. Now, what I did, I didn't just hold them up, and if I had a pinhole, I would cover it. I literally, can I have one of those screens, sir? Thank you very much. What I would do, and you can see on this one, I cover the entire screen with a block out, because that's going to eliminate any possibilities of pinholes or it breaking down around the edge. You know, just it's that simple, you know. That way you're not going to have that problem. Use a water-soluble block out. All these wash out when you reclaim the screen, so it's an easy step. You're not going to have to do any special steps to clean it out. If you're doing water-based or discharge, you have to use a certain block out that's made for that. Obviously, if you put this on a discharge print or a water-based, it's gonna break down and not work. We sell a nice solvent-resistant tape here. This is the RTC blue tape. I like this. It's easy to get off when you're through. You're going to have issues. If you're going to have issues, it's going to be where the mesh meets the frame, and that's typically where it's going to leak. And you'll notice I just tape on the bottom of the screens. I'm kind of a neat printer, so I don't get a lot of ink everywhere. We do make what's called a split liner tape, and it's just adhesive ever so often. A lot of people like to put that on the inside, so cleanup is pretty easy. You do what works for you. A lot of people use masking tape, that's fine. But on an automatic press, you almost always have to be pretty aggressive with your taping of the screens because that repetition. Okay, now we have Squeegee selection. We sell, and again, I'm going to keep this basic. We can get into all different kinds of squeegees. Squeegees are designed to help the ink flow through the screen mesh. The angle should be 45 to 60 degrees. The lower the angle, the more ink that you will deposit on the garment. Now this is very interesting. When we're going to play down in the screen room, we're going to have a different situation where one print will require one squeegee operation, the other print will require another squeegee operation. Ideally, the blade should just shear off the ink. Too much pressure and you will flatten the blade and blur the print. A 70 to 75 durometer blade works great on most applications. I'm going to pass these around. 70 is what we call a medium durometer. I've used this for everything from glass etching, 4-color process, everything. Now, why would you need a 60 durometer or an 80 durometer? In a textile shop, you're probably not going to ever use an 80 durometer. That's typically graphics, UV printing. Now, a 60, we could probably have used a 60 down in our print shop today with one of the applications. However, I've just found that 70 works the best. We can actually get into some squeegee blades that are triple durometer. They'll actually have like a 90 on the inside and a 65 and a 65 on either side. And that, a lot of automatics work real well with that. Manual printing, you probably wouldn't have to get into that, but you'd be surprised how much better one of those works. typically 3 times higher than these, so that's not a necessity, you know. Any questions on squeegee blades?
How often do you have to replace them?
Well, how often do you have to replace a squeegee blade? That's a good question. And in my opinion, in textile printing, the blade just gets better. I kind of like it as it ages. Now, one of the processes that we'll be doing down there today, that goes against what I'm saying. You want a nice sharp edge. I found after a year or so, you know, you'll just replace them. And they're so inexpensive now. In the old days, we could actually take them apart and replace the blade. The new processes now, they glue and staple, so it's just basically a throwaway at that time. We can sharpen them for you. It's just really better probably just to replace them at that point. You know, a spot color is solid. Okay, if we're going to do a half tone is just a gradient. In other words, we want to get a shading of that area. So in a photograph, you know that a photograph is built up of dots. Well, that's the halftone part of that. Okay, guys, this is real important with squeegees. We talked about squeegees in the class. There's 2 different ways to do a print, and we're going to do both ways here. Most people probably have pulled the squeegee for years. Okay, that serves one purpose. The other one is pushing. Now, on this design here, it's halftone, so we're going to push. We're using this sharp, clean edge, and the reason that we're going to push, it reproduces the halftones. When you pull, that kind of smears the ink. Well, with this application, we want that. So with the halftone here, we're going to flood the screen. And this first couple of prints, I usually try to hit it a couple of times. Now, this is a real comfortable way to do it. Just nice, even pressure. And we have a nice print there. Okay, whoever is ready, and you'll just take the shirt off and just run it down the dryer. Who's got a shirt? Who's ready to go?